Lord God, we just thank you for this time that we get to come before you, and pray that you would help us to set aside everything that might be burdening us as we came here, all the things that might be sitting in the back of our mind that we need to do when we get home or tomorrow, or the conversations that we left midway, or the fights that are not resolved yet, or whatever it is. Lord, I pray that you would help us to set those things aside and focus on the better thing, focus on you right now. I pray that you would instruct our hearts. I pray that you would encourage our hearts through these very difficult to understand chapters. And I pray that we would walk away just filled up with you tonight. I pray that you would help me to just speak the words that are from you. I pray that you would just cause me to communicate effectively and in whatever manner would glorify you most. I pray this in your name. Amen. Okay, so we are covering chapters 38 to 42 tonight. And so the kind of overarching point, or I guess theme that I'm getting at tonight, is that when Israel goes back to the land, because that's what they're about to do, they're about to go back to the land, it's not going to be like it was before. And two things specifically are going to be different. And the first one is their experience of their enemies is going to be different than it ever was before. And then also their experience of the Lord is going to be different than it ever was before. So just in kind of a brief review, if I can do that in 20 seconds for the whole book of Ezekiel, Judah has been unfaithful, and a remnant of them has been taken away to Babylon as exiles, and then they have had to stand by and watch as the prophecies of Jerusalem falling come in and then come to pass. And so then they're left in Babylon, left probably feeling homeless and hopeless. And then what we got to study last week was this amazing message of hope that God gives them, which is that he's going to actually bring them back to the land, and there will be a place for them back in the land. And so from this point in Ezekiel to the end, I believe, it is sort of answering kind of so now what? What's it going to be like when we go back to the land? Because we've been there before, and it didn't seem to go so well when we were there before, because we've dealt with enemies and they pretty much just plucked us apart like a daisy. And we've also failed to worship God rightly. So what is it going to be like when we go back to the land this time? And so these chapters are speaking to that. They are going back to the land, but it will not be like it was before because something has changed. Hello. Come on in. So I was just saying that when we're talking about Israel is about to go back to the land, and but it's not going to be like it was before because something has changed. And the thing that has changed specifically is what we looked at last week in chapter 37, verses 26 and 27. God says this to the exiles: I will make a covenant of peace with them. It shall be an everlasting covenant with them. And I will set them in their land and multiply them, and will set my sanctuary in their midst forevermore. Not, if you obey me, you can stay in the land. This is my covenant of peace with you. You're going back to the land forevermore. There will be peace. What kind of peace is he talking about? So tonight, I'm kind of just talking about this in two sections. So the first is what Israel's experience of their enemies is going to be when they return, and then what Israel's experience of the Lord is going to be when they return. And just kind of a brief disclaimer, these chapters, and I believe we would consider to the end of the book, falls more into the category of apocalyptic literature. Is that right? It's all more apocalyptic at this point. And so a way I think it's going to be helpful for us to think about this is like a Sudoku puzzle. Have you guys ever played Sudoku? Okay, there's a lot of missing pieces, but there are some numbers that are there. Okay, and so what I really want to do is let's try not to focus a ton on what's not there, and let's try to look at what is there and let that help us understand the greater picture. And we may not finish the puzzle, but that's okay. God has given us some pieces to look at, and it will help us. So Israel's experience of their enemies. And this is chapters 38 and 39. And in those chapters, we have a picture of the battle of Gog and Magog. So this battle begins, remember, the exiles are going to be back in the land, and they're going to be dwelling safe and secure, and then this guy Gog is going to rally. He's the prince of Meshech and Tubal, and he's the prince of Magog, and he's going to rally all these other kingdoms, I suppose you could say, together to all come against Israel. And I have this picture. I don't know if you guys can see it. Okay, this is like Africa down here, and this is Europe, and this is Israel in the middle. So we have like Magog, Persia, Meshech, and Tubal, Gomer, that's here, Put and Cush, Rosh. So that looks a little hopeless to me. They're like totally surrounded. Yeah. So this, they're going to come against Israel. God says, I am going to bring you against Israel. And then when they come against Israel, he's just going to smash them. There's not even going to be battle. They don't actually ever even touch Israel. And then after the battle, God brings Israel in to kind of clean and cover up the mess and purify the city. So that's kind of the picture of this big battle. And this is where I think there tends to be varying views on eschatology. So some people believe that this is a battle that in some sense has happened and continues to happen kind of in a repeated cyclical way. Some people believe that this is a battle that will happen. What? Yes?
What is eschatology?
Eschatology is the understanding and study of end times. So, okay, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have assumed we all understand that. So this is where people get different views of like how it's all going to go down in the end. So some people believe that this battle is continuing to happen. It's like a big recapitulation. It's just like this big word that it means it's like cyclical. It's continuing to happen. And then some people believe that this will happen, like this actual battle is going to take place at some point in the future. And then some believe that this is strictly theological geography here, that there's not going to be a physical battle. Okay, I'm not even going to talk about any of that. That's not what I'm concerned with tonight. I'm just letting you know that that's here, and that's maybe if you've read some various things, you might read some of that. What I want to talk about tonight, the timing that I want to focus on, is the timing that our author seems to be really concerned with, our Sudoku numbers, and that is the fact that this is all happening after they've been restored to the land, when they're supposed to be dwelling safely and securely. Coming back to that in a minute, but really quick, as we get into thinking about this, who is Gog and what is Magog? If that's a question in your mind, I wanted to talk about that really briefly so you have a little context. So Magog was a person. Magog is the son of Japheth. And who's Japheth the son of? Noah. So, Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And so Japheth had sons, children, and Magog is one of those sons. And Magog's descendants settled sort of up north near Russia. And they're known to be really skilled horsemen, experts with the bow, fierce, innumerable. These are kind of the descriptors of them. So, from where we stand today, Gog represents the enemies of God that will one day be crushed forever, sort of in a broad picture. But from the exile's perspective, it's probably not that broad. Gog would be a little more the idea of just the fact that there is an enemy still out there, like impending threat, after they're supposed to have returned to safety. So that's probably the mental space that they're working in is an impending threat. Ezekiel says of them, just try to like feel this, put yourself in this. Ezekiel says of them, they've been restored from war, gathered from a place of continual waste, brought out of exile, and now dwell secure. And how desperately does someone who's come back from war want to just dwell secure without a single thought that there is a threat out there. How hard must that have been to have gone through this whole traumatic experience that we just kind of reviewed, that they've been taken away, they had to hear about their home being totally thrashed, and then to be through that whole experience and come back and just want to rest, but then there's still an enemy out there. I think this is something that we can feel too. I think the desire to come to the Lord and just want it to be better, just want it to be easy with God. And maybe you're someone who's been restored to God, but you can feel the enemy say of you what he said here: I will fall upon the people who dwell securely to seize spoil and carry off plunder. And I think our enemies come a little more in the form of maybe like circumstances that threaten us, that threaten our hope, circumstances that threaten our joy, circumstances that make us say things like, it's not going to be okay, or I don't think God sees me, or I don't think God cares. Well, in this battle, as in our battle, the enemy can't actually steal what God has promised to his people. In chapter 39, 2 and 3, God says to Gog, I will bring you up from the uttermost parts of the north and lead you against the mountains of Israel. Then I will strike your bow from your left hand and will make your arrows drop out of your right hand. The enemy comes up against Israel, but they don't ever touch them. God strikes them down, decisively strikes them down. And our enemy cannot touch us either. And that's because the riches that we have, because God set his favor on us and brought us into relationship with him, and under that safety, like they were brought under safety, the riches that he's given us aren't things that can be taken. I love 1 Peter chapter 1, starting in verses 3 and 4, it says this: Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. According to his great mercy, he has caused us to be born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, unfading, kept in heaven for you. So our spoil and our plunder that the enemy might want to come after and take from us, it's not here on this earth. And how precious is that God is keeping for us all the benefits of our salvation in heaven, where our enemies can't even touch it. This made me think of sometimes we're getting ready to go to a friend's house to play or to park, and my kids get their coats on, and kids always want to like stuff every weird thing in their pocket to bring it with them. And so sometimes they want to bring like all of the money to their name with them that they stuff in their pocket. And as we're going out the door, I just feel like this is such a familiar narrative in my home. We're going out the door, and I'm like, you know what? Let's not bring your money with you. No, I really, really want to. Okay. Let me take your money and I'm going to keep it with me. I'm going to keep it in my wallet and it's going to be safe, and then nothing can happen to it. And so that way, when they come home and they go, Mom, I lost my coat, or my coat fell off a bridge, or somebody stole it, or whatever the thing happened, and they go, my money was in the pocket. No, it wasn't, because I was keeping it safe for you. And that's what God does for us. He keeps the most valuable thing we have hidden in heaven, so that when our circumstances surround us, like all those nations, to threaten to steal from us, if it's maybe it's financial struggles or broken relationships or a loss, we get to say, my hope wasn't in that pocket. And the wonderful hope of this whole story of this battle too is that actually God is one day going to just deal with it forever. Like forever they're going to be gone, and we're just not even going to have those enemies anymore. But we're kind of stuck between right now. So we can remember that our hope is in heaven for us. So that is how God's people's experience of enemies is forever different when they come to know God and be with God under his safety. And so I want to talk now about the temple chapters and how Israel's experience of God is changed. So again, there are some varying views on this, but the way that we're all going to be talking about the temple, and you're free to chat amongst your groups if you have other ideas or whatever, but the way that we're going to be talking about the temple is that the temple is a vision, not a blueprint. So when you read it, it probably really, really felt like a blueprint. It was like super technical, and you might have had to take a Tylenol to read it and get through the study on it. But we're talking about this like it's a vision, okay? And there's some reasons for that. And so first, this temple was actually never built. Israel did return to the land, and they did build a temple, but it wasn't this one. And the second reason is that vision language is being used here. So he says in chapter 40, verse 2, "In visions of God, he brought me to the land of Israel and set me down on a very high mountain on which was a structure like a city to the south." So first he uses the word visions, in visions of God. And then he says, he set me down on a very high mountain in the vision. And so that's pretty characteristic of vision language, that in a vision someone would be brought to a high mountain to be shown something. And then also the fact that he says he was shown something like a city. So that's also characteristic of visions, to something that's like an altar, like a chariot, like it's something similar to that. And so we're going to be talking about this like it's a vision. Also, they were never commanded to build it. Here's the thing that God does command. Chapter 40, verse 4. "And the man said to me, 'Son of man, look with your eyes and hear with your ears, and set your heart upon all that I show you. For you were brought here in order that I might show it to you. Declare all that you see to the house of Israel.'" So the command was to tell Israel something. They were supposed to receive a message. That's the purpose of this temple. So remember, our exiles are about ready to go back to the land after God has promised to give them new hearts and make them walk in his ways. But it's not going to be like it was before, because before they didn't worship God rightly. But now God is making things new, and he's going to make things right. So in order to explain to the exiles how they now must interact with God, how this is going to be different, he gives them a vision of a temple. Why a temple? Glad you asked. For the Israelites, temple was their only concept of access to God. So if we go all the way back to Eden, God used to meet with man in Eden, but then Adam and Eve were sent out of the garden, and man couldn't meet with God anymore. So he didn't have that kind of access anymore. But then God did make a way for man to meet with God through first the tabernacle and then the temple, because at the temple there could be purification and sacrifice, and through a high priest they could come to God. So then God could meet with man again. So as far as the Israelites are concerned, the concept of temple is just the means by which you can access God. It's where God and man meet. So I think about it like if you're trying to explain to a toddler that someone's like really, really wealthy, you wouldn't say like, "Oh, they have billions of dollars." You would say, "Oh, they have like buckets of lollipops." So they're trying to explain it in a way that Israel is going to understand. He's telling them, when I restore my people, this is what access to me and communion with me will be like. So the temple has always existed as a structure to show what a right relationship with God will look like through Jesus. And let me explain what I mean by that. This quote explains it so well. Edmund Clowney said this. He said, "It's not so much that Christ is fulfilling what the temple means, rather that Christ is the meaning for which the temple ever existed." It's always been trying to help you understand Christ. So in this vision, God's using Old Testament temple language to explain what restored and right worship is going to look like, because temple is their only concept of relationship to God. So that's how we're talking about temple. I know that was a really big, fat, long introduction on temple, and I have just a few things to say about the chapters 40 to 43, 42. Thanks. So I want to show you that in these chapters a little bit. So to talk about the temple vision, first I wanted to note that this temple vision is a chiasm. Do you guys remember chiasms? So if you don't remember, or if that's not familiar to you, a chiasm is where a story sort of builds and then unbuilds. So there's a point made here, and then there might be another point made here, and then there's another point that's at the top, and then as it unbuilds, it's kind of mirroring these other points that were made here. Okay, so it kind of starts and ends in the same place, the middles are kind of the same, and then there's usually kind of one thing that's said in the middle that's really kind of the punch of it. So he walks us into the temple and out of the temple like a chiasm. So this vision starts and ends at the east gate. And that's really significant because in Eden, Adam and Eve were sent out the east gate. And then, of course, we know that God's glory left the temple out the east gate. So the fact that he's starting at the east gate here is sort of speaking to, it's sort of a restoring, correcting concept here. I'm correcting what has been done wrong. I'm undoing the problem here. And you may have noticed it begins and ends also with walls, big walls around the outside. And these walls are doing what the priests failed to do. If you remember, the priests were supposed to make a distinction between the holy and the common. And here's where we get to see that the temple has always been trying to show us Jesus, because that is a distinction that Jesus kept perfectly, and he had to keep it in order to give us access to God. And it's something that we in our lives, as we follow Christ, as we live out being the temple, are supposed to keep as well. You shall be holy as I am holy, he says. So then we get into the outer court of the temple, and it's really, really huge. The measurement there shows us a lot of space between this outmost part and the very inner part where the actual temple is, like the most holy place. And so those measurements are doing a couple things. They're showing us first that it's just like the separation, the space, like this really huge buffer between people in God's holiness. And just, I think it's magnifying the holiness of God. But also, if you've noticed, there's been like a lot of focus on the nations in the book of Ezekiel. Here's where I think it really kind of comes to culminate, because this temple has room to spare. It has room for the nations. Last week, you might have noticed God said repeatedly he's going to bring the whole house of Israel, including those who would be gathered from the nations, in. And that's what Jesus did. Jesus brought in the nations. He tore down in his flesh the dividing walls of hostility. And there's room for everyone who Jesus will accept here. And so I think we can think about, do we live like his courts are as huge as they are? Do we desire and seek out to fill his courts with worshipers? Or do we sort of pick and choose who maybe we would like to see in God's kingdom? Are there types of people maybe that we're particularly uncomfortable welcoming? One of the other things we see here is sacrifices. Sacrifices are part of this temple, and that's actually not something I'm going to talk a lot about right now because that comes up a little more next week. But we do see that everything necessary for right sacrifices is here. There's the tables where, and he's so specific as to tell you what's supposed to happen in each place. There's the tables, and then there's a spot for each tool, and everything is supposed to happen in its right spot. And not only that, but the sacrifices have to be made by the right people. The sons of Zadok. So the sons of Zadok, we know we know that the tribe of the Levites are the priests. Okay, but he says here that not any Levite can be a priest here in this temple. It has to be the sons of Zadok, and he tells us later why. Because they are the ones who kept God's charge and didn't go astray when the people of Israel did. So we're going to get more into that next week, but the sacrifices have to be done the right way. And then we get to the temple itself in the center, which is the peak of the Chiasm. And in the temple, right outside the most holy place, so the temple is more of like a rectangle and the most holy place is a square, but in the temple and right outside the most holy place, he says this: he sees something resembling an altar of wood. And then he says, this is the table that is before the Lord. And I just want us to consider, in light of that, the table that we have that is before the Lord. The table that we get to come to every Sunday morning and take the bread and take the wine. It resembles an altar because there's flesh and blood on it. And it's a table that brings us near to God. That table is something that belongs to us because we've been reconciled to God, and it's the place where we receive Jesus' sacrifice. You see how the whole temple is a picture of God giving himself to us? He's giving himself to us. So to come full circle, what do we have in the face of our enemies? You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. We have the table that is Jesus. The table that brings us near to God. Let's remember this next time we walk up to that table, that we are boldly taking the thing that God promised to us and proclaiming that our enemies have no claim on us because we have the bread and we have the wine. So when God restores you to himself, you may still have enemies lurking while we wait for God to destroy them ultimately. But we have God now. That's temple. Let me pray. Lord, thank you so much for coming to us. We could never make it to you. We needed you to come to us. We needed a covenant that we don't uphold one side of. We are so thankful for the great cost that you paid to be with us. We are so thankful for the temple. We're so thankful for the promises that are in our hand while we're in the in-between waiting for our enemies to be gone forever. Lord, remind us of this. Remind us of your promises when we're tempted to despair. Whatever thing is going on in our lives that makes us feel like there's no hope, or that you don't see, or the things that are just taking our joy away. Lord, help us to say in the face of those things that I have God now. And Lord, I pray also that every time that we take the Lord's Supper, that you would just preach that sermon over us, that this is our joy and our hope, and it is a promise from your hand. I pray these things in your name. Amen.